Hello there, it's Gabby here from Confidence After Cancer, and I hope this finds you well. This week's podcast guest is a very remarkable woman, Leanne Gunns, and you're going to meet Leanne in a minute, and she's going to tell us about her story, about her journey, and which does include a diagnosis of a very aggressive breast cancer. But that's not really been the major factor in her life. I'm going to introduce you and let Leanne tell her story about what happened to her and the quite shocking events of what happened to her son. But what shines through this interview is her positivity and her attitude to life, that no matter what life throws at you, you can choose your attitude. Even for some of us, an unthinkable thing, having a son who is disabled. She talks about this, about the blessings that she's found in that diagnosis, the blessings that she's found in her cancer diagnosis, and the fact that it helped her put her life into perspective. And also the work that she now does. She is an accountant, but more than that, she's a business strategist. She helps people, self-employed people, small businesses, and she talks in a really positive way about the opportunities that are available to us all these days in the world of the internet, particularly for midlife women, a bit like myself, who maybe, struggled to fit in with corporate life. Leanne's got some real words of wisdom about that, about how she can help people and what she can see that those sorts of people bring to the world of self-employment. So it's a really interesting podcast for me. Absolute pleasure to introduce and interview this remarkable young woman. And I hope you enjoy this week's podcast. And I'm going to introduce Leanne. See you in a minute. Bye. So good morning. And on this week's episode of Confidence After Cancer, I have a very special guest. The lovely Leanne Gunns is joining me today. Leanne is a breast cancer survivor, but actually that's not really the biggest part of her story. She's got some more stuff that's happened to her in her short life that she's going to share with us today. Some quite dramatic things, and I know that she's looking good today because, has got a happy ending. It's quite dramatic what's happened to Leanne. So welcome, Leanne. It's so good to see you. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you. No, thank you for the opportunity to come on. I love talking about all of these sorts of things. So yeah, I'm really excited to go through it today.
Excellent. Like I say, you have got such an unusual and a quite shocking story as well when I first heard your story. So I'd really like to start by talking about what happened to you with your son. You were quite a young mum, weren't you, when you had him?
Yeah, so I was 25 when I had my son. So actually, looking back now, that was, at the time it was quite difficult being relatively young. But now looking back, obviously, it happened for a reason because, a few years later, what happened. So I'll start a little bit further on from when I had him. When he was 2, this is 2015 we're talking, so a few years ago now. So when he was 2, my son had a cold. Like lots of children, when they're 2, they get colds, they get ill, you don't think anything of it. And on this particular day that I'm going to talk about, he had his nativity at nursery. So I did not want him to miss his nativity. It was the first one. It was his first year of being at nursery. So a really big event. So I was like, oh, he'll be okay. I'll give him some Calpol and we'll all be okay. Took him to nursery, dropped him off for his nativity. And then I drove to work. And in between that time of me dropping him off at nursery and driving to work, which was like 40 minutes, something like that, I got a phone call when I got there saying, oh, Charlie can't stand up. I was like, no. Charlie's just being silly because he's a bit tired and he's a bit grumpy because he's got a bit of a cold. I said, just get him to get on, he'll be fine. They're like, no, Leanne, he actually can't stand up. I was like, no, I just don't believe you. So they said, no, you need to come back and get him now. I was like, oh God, here we go. So leave work, as you do, like anyone with young children knows, it's really inconvenient when you have to leave your work to go and pick them up from their childcare to take them somewhere. So not thinking anything of it, thinking he was just a bit under the weather, I went back. I was more disappointed that he was going to be missing his nativity. Collected him from school, and the matron was at the nursery. There was a matron, like a nurse at school, that looked after the kids, and she was there with Charlie, and she said, right, you need to take him straight to A&E. And at this point I'm like, oh, maybe actually this is a little bit more serious than what I was thinking. Took him to the A&E department at our local hospital, and at this point he couldn't stand up. And when I say he couldn't stand up, I mean he probably couldn't stand up. It wasn't like he was being a 2-year-old sitting down throwing a tantrum saying I won't stand up. His legs were not working anymore. So from that point, we took him into the hospital, as you do. we had lots of people look at him and they all said, oh, he's got irritable hip. Don't worry, just take him home. This happens with 2-year-olds all the time. We see it all the time. Just take him home, give him a couple of weeks and he'll be back on his feet again. His hips are just hurting as part of growing pains. So we're like, okay, took him home. As the week went on, he was getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. So at his worst, he had lost most of the movement in his body up to his neck. So he was floppy, like all over. Looking back at it now, you trust the doctors implicitly, and I still do trust the doctors implicitly, but it was a really quite serious misdiagnosis at that time, but they had just not seen this condition. So do you know what I mean? It's just one of those things.
Yeah.
So we took him back to the doctors, the GP surgery, because at that time it was winter. Our local hospital was rammed. The CAU, which is like the children's A&E department, they'd given us a phone number to call, but we couldn't get through to them because they had so many cases. They were back to back. We couldn't get back into hospital. And in the end, the GPs had to phone the hospital on our behalf and say, look, you really need to see this child again. He's quite seriously ill at this point. They managed to get us back in. And just by chance, we saw a doctor that had just been on a training course for my son's condition, and he recognised it straight away. So we were incredibly lucky the second time we went in. And it turned out that I'd never heard this was even a thing. My son had a cold and his immune system had decided to attack his spinal cord rather than his cold. It was as simple as that. So we went from having a happy, healthy 2-year-old to having a child with a disability, like quite serious disability, within a few weeks. I mean, when this sort of thing happens, obviously, it's like anything that's quite life-changing. You don't really see it coming. You don't expect it. But then from that point, we had lots of hospital stays. Our life was changing forever. So we were actually released from hospital on Christmas Eve 2015. And just by chance, his condition's called transverse myelitis, and it's really quite rare, which is probably why I and nobody else had ever heard of it, including some of the doctors at the hospital ward, because it's literally like 1 in a million. So we got released on Christmas Eve. We went straight down to a specialist in London that the Transverse Myelitis Society had put us in touch with a specialist neurophysio, who we continued to see with the Transverse Myelitis Society support. They were absolutely amazing. But yeah, to say it was a little bit of a life-changing day. And unfortunately, he didn't get to do his nativity.
Oh, bless him.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things you don't ever expect this happening. And there's lots of things in life that happen, aren't there? Like
really
most people listening to this are going to have something in their life that they never expected to happen. But yeah, so yeah, literally my son got a cold and it left him permanently disabled, which is excellent. Yeah, so that was the real beginning of my story. So that's December 2015. And obviously this podcast is Confidence After Cancer. So you obviously know what's going to happen next. But we went home, we started to learn how to, deal with a child with a disability and all the rest of it. And our life changed quite dramatically at that point. Suddenly we were back using buggies and pushchairs and all of those sorts of things, dealing with endless hospital appointments. And then in the April, I found a lump, and I was very lucky in the fact that obviously at this age, I was 28 years old. I was not looking for any signs of cancer. I had no family history of cancer, didn't know anybody else who'd had cancer. I was very lucky that it was in a really obvious place, like right at the top. Otherwise, I wouldn't have found it. So then 4 months later, I saw the lump. And then it took me quite a while to actually get the diagnosis, because being 28 and being healthy and fit and young and no family history, people don't tend to think you have cancer at that point. So at that point, it took until the August for me to actually finally get the diagnosis. And so then August 15th, on my husband's birthday, we got diagnosis. And they told me there's 3 things it could be, Leanne. And it isn't 2 of them. And the third one's cancer. So like, great, thanks for that. So then off I go. So yeah, exactly. So this is where it comes in. Like, you get one blow with your child suddenly becoming disabled. And then 6 or so months later, you've got cancer. And suddenly the world looks very different, doesn't it?
It really does. It really does. You must have thought at some time, why me? Why? What have I done to deserve this?
Do you know, I never thought that. I literally, that was one thing that got me through, actually, was during all of this, I think I was so focused on my son that it made it easier for me. I never thought, why me? I never thought I was going to die. If anybody had said to you, oh, you're actually, this is really serious, Leanne, my cancer was really, really aggressive, really aggressive. And apparently that's quite common in younger women, that the cancer's really, really aggressive. But I was lucky in that, because it was in such an obvious place. I had 4 tumours, I could only see one of them, but because it was in such an obvious place, I'd spotted it early. But I never had that sort of attitude of, oh gosh, why does this all happen to me? I never had this attitude of, oh, well, I'm going to die. I never ever focused on that at all. And I think mindset is so important in these things, isn't it?
Absolutely. I agree. And sometimes people think it can be called toxic positivity. It's not just think happy thoughts and everything's going to be wonderful, but you do get to choose your attitude. Life 100%. Will throw these things at you that you never would have chosen in a million years, but you get to choose how you react.
Yeah, and I think if you'd have told me, like, even 5 years before that before you're 30, your son's going to have a life-changing condition, you're going to have cancer, you're going to have your life is going to be completely flipped on its head, I would not have believed you. Like, it just things like that don't happen to you, do they? They happen to other people, not to you.
Absolutely.
But having that attitude, and I found, actually, for me personally, I found it quite difficult to go to things like, for example, the cancer groups. There was an amazing group of young women who volunteered and voluntarily set up a breast cancer support group locally to me. Everybody was under the age of 40. I found these things quite hard to go to. That we were quite lucky in Norfolk that we have loads and loads of options for cancer support. Right. But personally, I just thought I was going to be okay, and I didn't want to sit there and talk doom and gloom with loads of people. So for me, there's that sort of thing wasn't really an option. And I think people often can't understand why you would be so positive through it, but for me, that's just the way I was. I just carried on, and I actually found it really comforting to look at the short term. So with me, everything was focused on the next 2 weeks, because in my treatment, and I don't know whether this is fairly unique to me or whether this is quite common, but everything seemed to have a 2-week deadline on it. 2 weeks to get your test results, 2 weeks to get your treatment plan, 2 weeks to get this. There's a lot of 2 weeks going on, isn't there? So if you just look at your life in 2 weeks, it made it much, much easier. And obviously, whilst trying to work out a treatment plan for me, I was having to deal with OTs, physios, orthotics, like all these things that I had no experience with. And being the parent of a disabled child now, I'm very confident in all the things I have to do. I'm very confident with the never-ending forms. I'm very confident with all of these things. But as a mum to a disabled child, as a new parent carer, you just don't know. So my time was very much tied up with filling in forms. I did a lot of form filling in the early days.
And it sounds exhausting. I mean, breast cancer at the best of times is exhausting because, what it does to your mental state. There is so much to learn. There's all the, terminology. Should you join a support group? Some people find it really helpful to talk to other people. But like you say, there can be a lot of doom and gloom out there. And some people just love to go into victim mode. And it's, understandably, it's quite scary, but you don't need that fear around you. So, that's how I felt anyway.
Yeah, I was the same. I couldn't, and I'm not saying if you're in the early stages of diagnosis, you shouldn't go to a support group. If that's right for you, then that's right for you. And there are some amazing ones out there. But for me personally, the cancer was almost secondary. Like my priority was my son and getting him sorted out. And I did go to support groups with him, but I didn't go to anything for myself. And I was also quite lucky in that I have an amazing best friend who stepped in and helped us no end. I have a big family. I have, so I was quite in a lucky position. And I know, again, not everybody has that. So, finding a place of support is really important for some people, but it just wasn't for me. I couldn't listen to the victim mentality at all, because it was so far removed from where I was at that time.
It's interesting what you said as well about the family and friends, because you really do find out, at a time like that, who will step up for you and who's there for you. And again, it's count your blessings. I know it's such a cliche, but it does make you count your blessings and realize how very fortunate you are. Yes, these terrible things have happened, but some people, managing these things on their own or not without that lovely warm network that you've got. So thank goodness you had that around you to support you. But thank goodness as well, I think that you found that inner strength to focus on your son and get what he needed and to fight with the forms. And I can imagine it's a nightmare if you're not familiar in that world, but navigating as well.
It's a whole new world, and particularly nowadays where funding is so short and the kids still need all this stuff. The kids still grow out of wheelchairs and you have to fight for a new wheelchair. Every single thing that you need for your child as a parent carer, you have to fight for. And it's just, you have to just keep going with it. And it's almost similar to battling cancer in a way. And actually, in some ways, the cancer situation was one of the best things that ever happened to me, because it completely changed my outlook on life. It completely changed everything I do. I know that I can do whatever I want to do, like 100%. I have got that confidence now. And I know that a lot of that came from this diagnosis that I had, and the process that we went through as a family meant that now there's very little that's going to break me. Do you know what I mean? I can take on the world and it'd be fine because we've done this. And actually,
that's great to hear. Well, and I think one of the things I say, the biggest thing mistakes that I see people making after a diagnosis or anything bad that happens is living in fear, because that's not living to me. You know, it's given, like I say, probably always had that inner strength, but now you've seen it and you know it's there and you know you can draw on it. So
I think if you are finding it difficult to find that strength, then what I found really good was just focus on the short term. Don't think 6 months down the line. Think today, tomorrow. Like when I was going through chemo, I still worked, and I refused to stop working during chemo because I needed something to keep me sane, because my life had literally been turned on its head, and I was on a 3-week cycle. So I'd have a week chemo on the Monday, be really ill for that week, you know, like everyone probably listens to this knows how ill you are when you're having chemo. And then I would go back to school, go back to work on the second week and the third week, and then have the third one off again. So I would be constantly rotating this. And actually, that's how I had to focus. Chemo week, I had to focus on getting to Wednesday. If I got to Wednesday, I could start to function again. And then if I got to Friday, I'd be able to like stand up and get out of bed and stop being sick and things like that. And then if I got to Monday, I'd go back to work. Do you know what I mean? So you just focus on the short term. Don't think 6 months, a year down the line, my life is going to be like this, because I can guarantee you can't predict what your life is going to be a year down the line, because this is going to change everything, isn't it? So yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, I'm very much like you. I worked through my treatment as well, and well-meaning friends were saying, "Oh, do you think you should be working?" But it gave me focus. For that time, for a short period of time, I go to work, back in the day, put my suit on, and I felt like a normal person, if you like, not a patient, not a victim, not a cancer patient. So mentally, it did a lot for me. But obviously, you've got to balance your energy levels.
That is key, isn't it?
I like that as well, the focusing on the short term, because we can all do that. We can all worry about what's going to happen in the future, but actually, just focus on today. Have a good day today, and the next week. If you plan out your next week to expect good things to happen.
And don't you think that's true in life, just in general as well? Like, it doesn't have to be in cancer mode that you think like that, but you never know what's going to happen. And I think my story is key in this. For so much having such a short space of time, you never would have expected it. But before then, we never really understood how lucky I was. And then afterwards, hang on a minute, life's too short. Why are you worrying about this stuff?
Absolutely, life is too short. That is a great, sort of mantra, isn't it? To think about other things you used to stress about, really trivial things that don't matter. Look at the big picture. Look at how lucky we are. We've got families. We've got children. We've got, we're here, enjoying life. So that's really good. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about, Leanne, is I know that you are passionate about inclusion, and I know I've heard you talk about this before, and I'd like you to just explain a little bit. What does that mean? Why are you so passionate about it?
So inclusion is basically giving everybody a level playing field to start with. So the best way, I've seen a really, really good image on inclusion, and I'll try and explain it the best I can. But basically, everybody needs to look over a really tall fence to see what's on the other side of the fence. Everybody's boxes that they need to stand on to see over the fence are going to be slightly different heights, basically. So you can have tall people. I'm quite tall, so I probably wouldn't need a box. And then you'd have somebody next to me who might need a massive box because they're really small. So inclusion is that box. It's giving people the tools to be able to enter the world on a level playing field. And this doesn't just mean in the world of disability, like physical disability. I'm not just talking ramps, like I'm not just talking lifts, accessibility things. I'm talking across the board. And I think I'm pleased that my son is born in an era where inclusion is even spoken about, because obviously, I have family members who have disabilities, and their time probably wasn't as easy as what it's going to be for my son. And I'm not saying it's easy for him, because it is not. We still live in a society where inclusion is not at the forefront of what we do, but it could be anything. So, for example, allowing somebody who has a disability, whether that be a physical one or, like a neurological issue or whatever it might be, to enter the workplace. This is a massive thing. Why should somebody with a disability be paid less than somebody without a disability? Why should they be taken advantage of more than somebody without? Schools is a massive thing for me. Schooling I never had any idea how difficult it is to find a school that is right for a child with additional needs, because guess what? One size doesn't fit all with education. Like, that's the way the UK system works, is one size fits all, but it just doesn't. So it's understanding that everybody needs different tools in place to access the same thing. And whether that be that they need a carer's ticket to a theme park, or whether it be that they need a ramp up some stairs, or whether it be that they need an area within a workplace where if the sensory overwhelm gets too much, they can take themselves off and just sit in the dark for 5 minutes. Do you know what I mean? It could be any of those things, but it just has to be at the forefront of whatever you do. And it doesn't necessarily have to be an expensive, costly process. It can be as simple as just asking somebody what they need to access whatever it is you're offering.
Okay, that's really interesting. Yeah, I've got several friends that I know talk about with equal passion about the same subject. And I think in the world of work, I was talking to somebody like yesterday about sexual equality and how things have changed, you know, since I started work. And I think, yes, things have changed, but we've still got a huge way to go.
We've got a massive way to go. And I think there's a real need in this country as well to sort of push forwards with it. I think in some respects, we are really lucky that we live in a very liberal society. We're very accepting as a society, I would say, but just accepting that people with disabilities exist doesn't necessarily mean that we're doing as much as we possibly could be to allow them to access things, in particular as they get older and they start to leave school or they leave university or whatever it might be, making sure that we can get these people into the workplace in the best possible way for them is so important. And actually what you'll find, especially like within the neurodiverse community, and you know, they have a different way of looking at things, so they are amazing assets to any business, but we just need to put things in place that allow them to access the workplace or access schooling or access a theatre or whatever it might be in the same way that anybody else can do.
Love that. Okay, thank you. Your passion shines through.
I know. I start running on one. Sorry.
That is absolutely fine. That's why we're here to talk about these things. So how is Charlie now? How is he health-wise?
So he is really good now. I mean, I'm not going to say that our life is simple by any stretch of the imagination. It is not. But Charlie sees his disability as a first-class ticket to life. Those are his words. He thinks his disability is amazing. And we had a situation last year where he thought doctors were trying to fix him and make him not disabled anymore. And he was like, I don't want to not be disabled, because he can't remember ever not being disabled for a starter, but he sees it as his superpower almost. He can whiz in his wheelchair faster than his friends can run. He can do all these things. He gets to jump queues and, you know, all this stuff that he sees as a real positive. At the moment, we are in a very good place where he doesn't necessarily see all the negatives. That being said, he's got major surgery coming up. We've got all sorts of things that go on constantly. We spend a huge amount of time in hospital. We get to see all of the corners of the country, going to various different hospitals, whether it be up north, south, you know, all over the place. We go all over the place. But actually, for an outlook point of view, if you ever need motivation for how to look at the life, you know, look at the world positively, go and find a disabled child and see how they do it, because 9 times out of 10, you'll be taken aback with their positivity. When we go to spinal units, for example, there's one particular spinal unit we visit quite regularly, and the kids on there are just amazing. They all look at it positively. They all just take it in their stride. And, you know, these kids have often had quite serious life incidents that have led to them being disabled, but they just take it all in their stride. And actually, I think as adults, we could learn an awful lot from those kids who have these things happen, about just taking life by the horns, basically, and just going with it, because you can't change these things. So there's no point in trying.
Oh, he sounds amazing. How old is Charlie now?
He's 10.
He's 10 now. Okay.
Yeah. It's getting big now.
Oh, bless him. And so health-wise, Leanne, how are you? You look really well.
I am absolutely fine. I mean, I'm not going to lie and say that I am back to pre-chemotherapy levels by any stretch of the imagination, because I'm not. But health-wise, do you know what? I'm good. I still get tired sometimes, and sometimes my brain isn't quite as efficient as it once was. I can't do mental maths as well as I used to do, but hey ho, that's what a calculator's for. And it's just adapting, isn't it, to a new way of life. But I am very lucky. I am doing really good, and my cancer's completely gone and has been for some time. So yeah.
Excellent to hear that. And just wanted to really finish, because I know that you run your own business as well. You are a busy woman.
Yes.
So you're an accountant, that's right, isn't it? And I know that you say that you help small businesses. So just tell us a little bit about how you help small businesses. What do you do for them?
So one thing I found particularly, and this links back quite specifically to after my diagnosis and after my son's diagnosis, I just physically couldn't carry on in the workplace. I was going into the office and I had a really understanding boss who was amazing about it, but I'd be going in, then going to hospital, then going to another appointment, then picking my son up, going there, literally spent no time at all there. And it was exhausting. So for me, being self-employed has been a ticket to freedom. And I was lucky that I worked in an industry that I could quite easily go on my own. And I just literally left my job with 0 clients and just ran with it. So what I do is I help other business owners do what I've done. Basically, I help you make more profit in your business. I help you have the confidence to start out on your own. And often, actually, what I do is, obviously, I do the stuff everybody knows accountants do. I do tax returns, I do VAT returns, I do accounts, I do all of this stuff. But actually, my role, whilst working with a company, is often much more like a sounding board. We go through ideas together, we go through things and make sure we have a plan. We come up with like a world domination plan, if you like, for that particular business and that particular service. And I am really, really passionate that self-employment is often an amazing key to people who have had slightly difficult lives, whether that be mental health issues or physical disabilities or whatever it might be, or maybe your family life is just a bit complicated, or you're a single parent with kids at home and you're trying to juggle the school runs. Being self-employed, and it doesn't have to be in a service-based business like I have, it could be in anything, actually can be the biggest ticket to freedom that you will ever experience. It can mean that you can earn decent money, you can work whatever hours you want. And a lot of the time with business owners that I see, they physically couldn't work in a 9-to-5 job anymore because their life just doesn't work that way. They might have elderly parents they need to care for, or whatever it might be, or they might have like a health condition, which means that sometimes they just have to go to bed for a day and that's it, and they can't do that. Whereas self-employment means you get to pick your own hours, you get to do your own thing. And often people just need a bit of support to get out there and run with it. And then that's where I come in, bringing in some help and advice and helping people get along their way.
Love it. Yeah, I've got a lot of friends, and I'm sure there's a lot of followers of the podcast that are self-employed as well for many reasons. And corporate life is not all it's cracked up to be. I know that, to my cost.
It's really not.
Yeah,
it's really not. And I think particularly if you've had a life-changing event like a lot of us have, suddenly things just don't seem as important anymore. Suddenly climbing the corporate ladder, for example, doesn't seem so important. And actually what I see within my client base is a huge number of people who have learned skills within their corporate jobs or within whatever job they did before. And they don't necessarily run a business in that specific thing they did before, but they've taken those skills, like, for example, they were a manager or something before, so they've taken it and now run leadership training, or whatever it might be that they've done. They've taken certain skills and turned that into a really successful business that works for them, which is key, isn't it? Working for them.
Absolutely. Yeah, right. Yeah, I think, again, looking back at mistakes I've made for many years, I tried to fit in with corporate life and tried to be a good employee and do what my boss wanted me to do. And looking back and thinking, it just wasn't me. I wasn't being myself. I wasn't allowed to be myself. Didn't think I could. And self-employment, like you say, is the door for a lot of people to just think, actually, there's nothing wrong with me. There's maybe something wrong with the structure that I was working in. Nothing wrong with me. I'm okay. And I've got a lot
the system,
to offer.
isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think
particularly midlife women sometimes forget how many skills they've got if they've juggled a family or managed a household. All the skills that you do without even thinking about it that you've acquired over the years. Yeah, absolutely.
Particularly as a midlife woman, for example, I have a lot of clients who are in this space. You have learned so many skills over your lifetime. You have not necessarily brought up a family, but you may have brought up kids. Yeah. So you've learned negotiation skills, you've learned leadership skills, all these things. And actually, particularly if you've got to a point where, let's say you've had some kind of diagnosis, your life has changed, you're feeling a bit like almost like you haven't got anything to offer. This is the perfect time to look back at what you have done and all the things you have done. And even if you haven't had a corporate job and you don't have a degree, I left school at 16 personally, and I went on and trained whilst my son was I left my son in hospital at times to go and sit exams. That's what I did personally. I sat exams all the way through having chemo. I just carried on going. So whilst I'd been an accountant for a long time, that really spurred me on to carry on. And actually what you find is people get to a certain point when they just don't see the value in what they can offer anymore. And that is such a shame, because these are the people with the skills that can make a massive difference in the world. And we live in an era now with the internet and the online industry. There has never been a better time to start your own business than what there is now. People go on, like cost of living crisis or financial instability and all of this other things. There are people making millions and millions of pounds, regardless of all of those situations. And now we have the tools where you don't need to go and get a physical shop and set up on the high street now. You don't have to go and get a market stall. You don't have to show up in person. You can come up on the internet, set up a business, and literally the next day, with very little outcome, you can be a self-employed person making money. And that's why it's so important now to have those options and just believe in yourself that actually you can do it. Because if I can do it, anybody can do it.
Yeah, belief is huge. Yeah, and I think probably another podcast just on the subject of belief. Yeah, because it's key to so many things. But so much good advice in there, Leanne. Thank you so much. It's been lovely talking to you. And I just really want to say, I'm going to obviously put your website and any contact details in the show notes below. So anybody wants to get in touch with Leanne, they can do. What is the best way for people to get in touch with you?
So if you look me up, I'm on Instagram. So it's at the little @ The Profit Hero on Instagram. Or I also have a free Facebook group if you are a business owner, which is Progress to Profit with the Profit Hero and Strategy Angel. If you want to come and join us in there, we have lots of free training and support in there as well.
That sounds amazing. And yeah, like you say, so much needed in this day and age.
Yes.
It's been lovely talking to you. Thank you so much. I'm hoping we'll talk again because it felt like we could talk all day.
Definitely.
Have a brilliant day.
Thank you.
Have a brilliant day. Thank you for coming on my podcast. It's been brilliant. Take care, my lovely. Love to Charlie as well. I hope you both stay well and keep on being as wonderful as you are. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Wow. Well, I really enjoyed talking to Leanne. I hope you can tell that. She blew me away with her attitude. I just loved her attitude to life. The positive way that she approached her son's diagnosis and dealing with his disability, the positive way she approached her breast cancer diagnosis, and she refused to become a victim. And again, as I always say, there's no judgment here. We're not saying this is the right way, this is the wrong way. There's no right and wrong to navigate some of the life's challenges that you may get faced with. But what you can do is draw inspiration from a woman like Leanne, who refuses to just give in, refuses to be a victim, so positive about the work that she does now, and that blew me away as well. So just really wanted to say how much I enjoyed her positive attitude. I loved what she said about midlife women and the skills that they sometimes forget that they've got, life skills that they've got that will set them in such good stead should they choose to be self-employed. And self-employment is a way out for a lot of people to escape rat race, if you like. So many blessings to be found in the flexible working life that a lot of people are finding now. And I'm going to be talking more and more about that, because to me, being happy and healthy isn't about spending so much time at the office or spending so much time climbing that corporate ladder, which a lot of us led to believe was the way to be successful in life. But really, is that success, or is success about having a balance, about doing what you want to do, about using your talent, your skills, your natural abilities to create a lifestyle that you love? Maybe that's what success is. I really believe that. And also, she talked about her diagnosis and her son's illness as giving her a little bit of an opportunity for time for reflection. And I talk about this a lot, following a cancer diagnosis, the time, the space that you can take after that diagnosis to really reassess your life, what's important, and maybe, just maybe for once in your life, putting yourself first. And lastly, I'm just going to say one of the things that Leanne said that really resonated with me was the importance of belief. Belief in yourself, belief that you can, if you want to, you can become self-employed, you can set up your business, you can do whatever you set your heart on. You might need help to get there, in which case reach out and find the people that can help you on that journey. So as always, thank you so much for listening to my podcast. It means so much to me. I hope you have an amazing week. I hope you join me again next week when we'll be talking about another subject that I hope you find interesting. Have an absolutely fabulous week. Stay safe, stay sane. Take care, my lovely. Bye-bye.